This is 1-4, and it's properties of real numbers. Properties of real numbers. When we talk about things being equivalent, do you know what that means? That's another word for equivalent, equal, okay? So we're going to have equivalent expressions. We're going to have equal expressions. So if you see the word equivalent, just know that's equal, okay? But the properties that we're going to talk about, we're going to put it in a chart because it just makes life a little bit easier to see how they all relate to each other. So you're going to make a chart with 3 columns. And the first column is going to be the property that we're doing. And then there's 2 different versions of each property. There's the property of addition. And there's the property of multiplication. Oh, that's messy. Multiplication. Sorry. Do you know what that says? Multiplication. It's messy. So really, we're going to talk about 3 properties that have all 3 of these columns as part of them. So the first property that we're going to talk about is called the commutative property. Would you say any of your parents commute? Do you know what it means to commute? I feel like most people commute these days. I don't. My husband doesn't most of the time. But to commute back and forth to work, right? So you start at home and you go to work, and then you're at work and you come back home, right? And it's usually a long trip, but the length of it doesn't matter for this property. So the commutative property of addition says that if I have an expression that is a plus b, that is equal to b plus a, right? I can add them in a different order and they are still equal to the same thing. That's the commutative property of addition. So it's like home to work equals work to home, right? It's the same distance no matter which way you do it, okay? So if we did that with numbers, it'd be like 6 plus 8 is equal to 8 plus 6. Okay, that's the commutative property of addition. Now, it's the exact same thing with multiplication, but now we're multiplying instead. So instead of saying a plus b, we're going to say a times b equals b times a. Okay, and then same goes for that. If we switch the numbers, 5 times 9 is equal to 9 times 5. Oops, I wrote 4. So 45 equals 45, right? Doesn't matter the order you multiply them in, you get the same value. So that works for multiplication and it works for addition. The second property is the associative property. And the associative property is, it deals with parentheses moving around, okay? So changing where parentheses are, and this is a little bit inappropriate. I'm not a swearer, okay? I don't swear. But that word right there kind of looks like a picture of parentheses, right? You can draw a little butt with parentheses. So the only reason I tell you that is because a lot of times it helps people remember what the associative property is, okay? Don't go around saying that word. I don't swear, and I don't believe you should swear, but it looks like that. So the associative property is like doing this. If I have a plus b, and then I add c to it, it would be the same as if I did a plus and then b plus c in the parentheses. So you can add in different orders, in other words, and still get the same value. So like if I do 2 plus 3 plus 4, that's the same as if I do 2 plus 3 plus 4. Okay, so think about it this way. This is 5 plus 4 is 9. This is 7 plus 2 is 9. So you get the same value, even though you moved where your parentheses were. All right? Same goes for multiplication. I can do A times B times C, and that will equal A times B times C. Okay? So if I put numbers with that, 2 times 3 times 4 should equal 2 times 3 times 4. Okay, so that's the associative property. And then the last one is identity. And the way I tell people to remember this is your identity is who you are, right? So if you change nothing about yourself, you have the same identity. Well, the identity property is like that. It's saying whatever you started as, okay, so A, if I add 0 to it, if I add nothing to it, my identity doesn't change, right? A plus 0 is always going to stay A. So 10 plus 0 will always be 10. That's the identity property of addition. Same goes with multiplication, but now it's not the 0 anymore, because with multiplication, to keep something the same, what do you have to multiply by? By 1, right? So if I do A times 1, I'm going to get A back again. So this is like 9 times 1 equals 9. Okay, that's identity property. There's 2 more properties, and then we're going to do a few examples. So there's the 0 property of multiplication. And you are welcome to do this. Instead of writing out the word multiplication every time, you can do a times sign, okay? So the 0 property of multiplication, what that one says is if you take something and you multiply by 0, you're always going to get what? 0. Okay, so A times 0 is 0, or 6 times 0 is 0. Okay, that's the 0 property of multiplication. And then there's the multiplication property. Such a long word. Multiplication property of -1. And that one says if you take a number and you multiply -1, you always get what? The opposite of it, right? So if I did A times -1, I would get a negative A. Or if I did -6 times -1, I get the opposite of it, which is a positive 6. Ryan, turn around. Okay? So that's the multiplication property of -1. If you multiply by -1, you always get the opposite. If you started positive, it becomes negative. If you started negative, it becomes positive. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to give you a few examples. You tell me the property. And you may keep the chart in front of you, but I want you to get familiar with these properties, okay? You're going to use them often. So first example. Let's say we do 15 times 0 equals 0. Which property is that? That's the 0 property of what? That's the 0 property of multiplication. Okay, what if I do this one? If I said t times 4 times 9 equals t times 4 times 9. Associative of addition or multiplication? Multiplication, right? We're multiplying. So this one would be the associative property of multiplication. Okay. How about if I do 10x plus 0 equals 10x? So I added nothing to it and it stayed the same. That's the, which property? That's identity of what? Identity of addition. Because we're adding, we're adding that 0 to it. So it's the identity property of addition. Okay, questions on that? Okay, so sometimes the reason we learn these properties is it really helps with mental math. Like when I say what's 86 plus 24 plus 9, sometimes there's a better order to do it in. So like the associative property or the commutative property will help with that order. So let's say I gave you this problem. Oops. Okay, so it says a movie ticket costs, and I'm not going to write the whole thing out, I'm just going to write the details. A movie ticket costs $7.75. A drink, yeah, this is old school, right? Not anymore. This is a matinee, big time. A drink costs $2.40. Again, not a true number. I should really change these numbers. And popcorn costs $1.25. Yeah, right. Okay. I want to know what's the total cost for a ticket, a drink, and popcorn. And you need to use mental math. So you're not going to plug it into your calculator on this one. I want you to think through, okay, what would that be? Well, if you just set it up as $7.75 plus $2.40 plus $1.25, and you start here and add those together, that's tough to add those together. But if we apply the commutative property and we say these two numbers, we can flip, right? So it's $7.75 plus $1.25 plus $2.40. That's a lot easier to do in your head because 75 cents and 25 cents makes an even dollar, right? So you have $7, $8, $9. Then if you add to that $9, $2.40, what do you get? $11.40. Okay, so see how that property just made your life a lot easier, okay? And this is so real world, you guys. This is stuff you use all the time in your everyday life. Like you're trying to figure out, I want to get these 3 shirts. What's it going to cost me? Well, if you add together the two that are easier to add together first and then add the third one, makes way more simplicity for your mental math. All right? Any questions on that? Okay. Last thing then is with these, oftentimes you're going to get a problem where it's like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and they're going to say justify your answer. Okay, so when they tell you to justify, this is example 3. When they tell you to justify the steps, or simplify and justify, this is basically what they're going to give you. So the first thing we have is 5 times 3n, okay? And now here's where you have to slow your brain down a little bit and really think about what you're doing, because a lot of you are just going to do this like out of instinct, and that's great, but you really need to figure out like why is that allowed, okay? So if this is my problem right now and I want to simplify it, what can I do to this to simplify this problem? Multiply what? The 5 and the 3. So what's actually happening is our parentheses are moving. We're doing 5 times 3 first and then n. What property is that?
15.
It is 15. What property? When we move the parentheses, we just did the associative property. Okay, so when they ask you, so the associative property of multiplication, when they ask you to move it, that's what you do. And then your next step then is to simplify that. So 5 times 3 is 15n. We just say we simplified. Okay, so this is what you're going to have to do with it. Is just, oops, I just crossed that out. Walk through the steps. Okay? How would you do this one? So if we have 4 plus 7b plus 8 to start, what's the first thing you want to do here? The what? You do what's in the parentheses, but 7b we can't add to 4, right? So there's no simplifying we could do there. What if we rearrange a little bit? So what if instead I make it 7b plus 4 plus 8? Okay, which property is that when I just flip the order? Which property flips them? That's commutative of addition, because we're adding, okay? Now what I actually need to do is I need to add these together. So I need to take that 7b and put the parentheses around the 4 and the 8 instead. Which property did I just do? That's associative of addition, okay? And then my last step is just to simplify that. So 7b plus 12, we just say simplify. We just added what we could add. And that's as simple as we can go. Okay? Okay, last one. And then we'll be good. Let's say we start with this. 6xy over y. So what does y over y equal? What? Y divided by y. Not y. What's 8 divided by 8? 1, right? So y divided by y is 1, okay? So if y divided by y is 1, basically what we're doing here is 6x times 1, which equals what? 6x, right? Which property is that? When you multiply by 1 and you get the same thing back. What didn't change? My identity, right? So that would be the identity property of addition or multiplication? Multiplication, okay? And I already simplified. Technically, this would be identity property, which gets you 6x, which is just simplify. Okay, so it's just walking step by step through each process and just slowing it down. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Let me hand your quizzes back. We'll see how much of it we can get through right now. If we don't get through enough, we will